All right, so today we're moving on in Hebrews 8, and while we say we're progressing through the book and we're moving on, the author is sticking to his guns and staying with the very same message. And that message is, hopefully by now you know it, he's been saying it over and over and over and over again, that Jesus is better, or Jesus is superior. Just keep saying it over and over. And sometimes we'll say, okay, we got that already. Let's move on to another message. We don't always like hearing the same thing repeated over and over and over again. Have you ever had someone keep reminding you about something? You're like, I think you've already told me that, like 3 times, all right? Basically what you're saying is you don't need to tell me that again. Or we can take it can be a little insulting that someone has to keep telling us over and over again. But as you think about why someone would remind you about some instructions or something you need to do over and over and over again, there could be at least 3 good reasons. You can probably think of more than 3, but I can think of 3. Someone would repeat themselves over and over again. Number 1, because they just keep forgetting. They forget. Right, so it'd be like walking into the next room to get something, and when you get in the next room, you're like, "What'd I come in this room to get?" Anybody? Yeah, so it's the same thing. It's like, maybe I forgot. I don't know, did I tell him that or tell her that? But you just keep repeating yourself. Well, the second reason is not because they are, the sender is forgetful, but the receiver, you are forgetful. And they know that. And I think that's why I think that's what's so insulting about it. It's like, they just don't think I'm a good listener. So they keep repeating something because they know that there have been times that you dropped the ball and you forgot what was being said. But the third reason is probably what I think is why the reader keeps going back to this. The content is so important, and he loves this and he cares for this group of people so much that he wants to see them embrace the new. It's so important. Content is so important. Similar that you would repeat yourself to someone else because you don't want them to miss a doctor's appointment, an SAT score, test, a class, an important date that you know if they missed it, they would miss out. And so you want to keep repeating. I know I might have said this already. Can I just kind of say this a different way? Because I don't want you to miss out on this information. But, and here's what we have to be careful of. We tire very quickly of hearing the same message. And I want to go back to a previous message. What we have to do, including myself, as I open up and say, didn't you say that in the last chapter? Didn't we talk about this last Sunday? What we have to protect against is not becoming a dull, he mentioned this, a dull listener. Because if we're a dull listener, well, the message just it's not going to continue to drop. Now, this became apparent to me, at least I think it's apparent, is that in the book of Hebrews, the author is trying to get his original audience to press into this new movement. And for them, we say like New Testament, new movement. For us, it's really not new. We call it new, but it's 2,000 years old. But for these guys, it really is new to them. And it's life-changing, and it's different than what they've ever been accustomed to. So what he's doing is he's pushing them towards Jesus, accept the new. But for us, we're accustomed to the new. What we need to do sometimes is be pressed into the old. And the reason why is because the old is the context for the new. For us to be able to understand better and fully why things are done like they are, then it's good to be pressed into what we would say is the old, or what we would say is kind of foreign to us. It's different to us. This is why it can be challenging for us to follow the content of Hebrews. It's because it's foreign. It's been called the most Old Testament of all the New Testament books. The most Old Testament of all the New Testament books, meaning that it cites and it references Old Testament customs more than any other New Testament book that we may not be familiar with. So we need to interact with the old so that we can understand and appreciate the new. The Old Testament can often, sometimes in our world, be relegated in importance. Just the idea. It's the old. Like, all right, we like newer stuff. Or if you're on a Bible reading plan like I am right now, that's taking us chronologically through the Word of God. Well, I'm still in the Old Testament. And sometimes you're like, I just need some New Testament. Anybody know what I'm talking about? I need some New Testament. I need some Jesus. I'm just saying, I get weary of details that I don't know much about, or that I don't know how to find the relevance of what I'm listening to. But both the Old Testament and the New Testament are necessary. John Bright is an Old Testament scholar. He compares the Old Testament and the New Testament to a two-act play. Both acts in the play are necessary to make it complete. Each has something to say, and neither act can stand alone without the other. So if we know the new, that's where most of us would fall, without knowing the old, it's like we're walking into a movie 45 minutes late. You don't have the context for what you're seeing on the screen. You don't know what happened previously. And what the New Testament is, it builds upon. It's not getting rid of. It's building upon the heart of God, the placeholder that was there. So we would, if we only know the new and not the old, we miss the context for why things are like they are. I'm not a movie watcher. I know some of you guys are. I'm the only one in my house that's not a movie watcher. And not that I have anything against movies. It's just I will either probably tend to fall asleep or my mind will wander. And I honestly, half the time in a movie, I'm lost. I'm just going to admit it. I'm lost. And I don't know why. If I'm scattered or whatever, and everybody else knows what's going on except me. But I'll watch maybe, I've done one this year. Might do two movies a year. And about a month ago, I got coaxed into watching a movie on a Saturday night, which is usually a no-no, but I got coaxed into it, and not knowing the length of this. Usually movies are, an hour and a half at max, and I don't know. See, I told you I don't know anything about movies. An hour and 45 minutes? 2 hours? What are they? Is that something like that? Okay. So this one was like 15 hours, I swear. I don't know how long it was, but it was a little over 2 hours. 2 hours, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And I'm telling you, from the very beginning, I was lost. I didn't know what was going on until 5 minutes before it ended. No lie. Now, to my defense, this movie is so well written, crafted, shot, all the things, that you just don't know what it's going towards until a moment happens, and then you're like, wow. Now, of course, everybody else in the room, in my family, they knew exactly what's going on, but they didn't. Maybe they did tell me. I don't know. They had already watched it. Yes, I think I was a lab rat. I think they were trying to see, let's look at him. He's lost anyway. This is really going to make him lost. And I was. But if I'd go back and watch the movie again, do you think I'd have a better understanding of the ending? 100%. Because now I know the ending. I know the why. I know the what. I know the who's. And so these details in the very beginning, I can already place them in certain conceptual places because I know what the end is. And that's why knowing the most Hebrew Old Testament book of all the New Testament books is a good thing. And knowing those details in the previous covenant, the Old Covenant, Old Testament, is important for us to understand what we're doing. Because as Act 1 ends, that's the Old Testament, there are unresolved tensions, unfulfilled prophecies. So we have these men of God that are saying that a Messiah is coming, but we don't know who or when. So, what is the very last book of the Old Testament? Anybody? Yeah. If you're Italian, it could be Malachi, whatever. Malachi. What's the first book of the New Testament? Matthew, man. Well, you're like Bible Jeopardy. How many years are in between Malachi and the Old Testament and the New Testament? 400 years. Okay. So, if you are alive at the time that Malachi put the pen down, and now you're waiting 400 years looking into this chasm of time, 400 years, you're waiting. There's unresolved tensions. There's unresolved prophecies. You hear Isaiah, you hear Jeremiah, you hear these respected men of God say that a Messiah is coming. You don't know who, and you don't know when. So here Act 2 comes along and reveals who Act 1 was pointing to. You can see it like this. Old Testament, concealed or predicted. I don't know if I like concealed or predicted. I think I like predicted better. New Testament, revealed. And so Act 2 is revealing all this setup that was done in Act 1. And Jesus' death isn't going to make sense unless you are familiar with the sacrificial system. It's like literally this guy was told, hey, Jesus died for your sins. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry he had to do that. You know, like there's no significance. That poor guy, he had to die. Like, no, but if you know the sacrificial system, you know that a life had to be given so that people could be forgiven. That's early on. Why is it set up like that? Without the shed blood, there's no remission for sin. Why? And I've asked myself, God, why did you create a system like that? There had to be some system, and it had to fit within their cultural context. So, I mean, God knows what he's doing. But it is just weird. It's strange to me that a life of an animal had to be given so that there could be forgiveness of sins. But now that it gets to Jesus and you hear John the Baptist say, look, the Lamb of God. And you start piecing things together and he's crucified. It makes sense what he has done. So knowing the details of Act 1 definitely helps us understand Act 2. And Hebrews is the most Old Testament of all the New Testament books. So we're in chapter 8. The author is repeating himself. And here's what it begins with. I'll read the first part of verse 1. Now the point in what we are saying is this. What he is saying is, look, I'm going to summarize what I've been saying. I was like, man, whoever you are, whether you're Luke, Paul, whoever wrote this, you've been summarizing for a long time. But he's summarizing again. Now the point of this is this. And he's going back to chapter 7 because he talked about Jesus as the high priest, and he gave some very specific reasons why Jesus is a better high priest, and he points them out. And then he's going to say, okay, so I'm going to summarize what Darian talked about last week. And here's the passage from last week. Hebrews 7, 23 through 27. Former high priests, they were many in number. Yeah, there are many in number from Moses and Aaron all the way to the time of Jesus. Anybody remember the high priest in Jesus' time? Caiaphas. So this whole line of priests, and they have been replaced because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But he holds his priesthood permanently, referencing Jesus, because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost to those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them or for you. For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest. And then he describes it. Holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, exalted above the heavens. He has no need, like those other high priests, to offer sacrifices daily. First for his own sin, he doesn't need to do that, and then for the sins of others, and he doesn't need to do that since he did it once for all when he offered up himself. And then he rolls into chapter 8, verse 1, which they didn't have it back then. He's just rolling in the conversation, like, take a breath, and then he says, now the point in what we are saying is this. Let me summarize what I just said. We have such a high priest, and he's one who is seated, not standing. He's seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven. He's a minister in holy places in the true tent that the Lord set up, not man. So God built this tent, not man. For every high priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Thus, it is necessary for this high priest, Jesus, also to have something to offer. So what he is doing is he is advancing once again. Don't be a dull listener. Jesus is better. He's a better high priest. But how and why is he a better high priest? Number one, he's going to say because our high priest is seated at the right hand of the throne. Well, why is being seated versus being standing better? Seated signifies completion. Now, you do your job, take a breath, seated, job is done. It's not like a temporary breather. The posture is declaring permanence. His posture, sitting down, declares permanence. And he's making his argument by saying he's a better high priest because he's seated. All the other high priests were standing. Why are they standing? Because they're about to get a ding on their phone to make another sacrifice. They got another sacrifice coming up. Why? Because you keep sinning. And there needs to be a sacrifice because the sacrifices offered yesterday is not good for today. And if you guys would just be a little bit better and quit being so crazy, then I wouldn't have to make so many sacrifices. No, we would still. But that's what he's saying is that one is seated because it's completion, while the other one is standing because it's not. It would be similar to this, that if you would decide to stay home for one entire day with your family or with your friends and decide that for that day you're going to cook breakfast, lunch, and supper. Well, you know what's going to happen. You're going to cook breakfast. You're going to dirty all the pots and the pans. You're going to get everybody together. You're going to come around the table. Whatever. It'll take 30, 40 minutes to cook. Then it's going to take 30, maybe share 30, 40 minutes around the table. And then what do you need to do? Yeah, you need to clean. You got to clean, and if you're type A anal, you're going to want everything up in its right place. So you put everything up in its right place. You get everything in the kitchen just right. You look at your clock or phone, and you go, oh my goodness, it's time to start cooking lunch. So you get everything down again. You start meal prep. You take all the time. Then you get everybody around the table, and you eat, and then you get that done. And now you look, and you're like, it's like another hour. I'm going to start cooking again. Is this all I do? Is this I have to cook? And that's the deal. It would never end. It would never end. And that is the way with the sacrifices here. They're just simply never going to end. And then, number 2, why he's better, his sacrifice. This was mentioned in chapter 7. His sacrifice, it doesn't thin. It doesn't thin. And it doesn't end. It doesn't thin. It's like, tomorrow you're not going to out-sin the grace that was extended for you. His grace is sufficient. His grace is there. It's once for all. You don't have to wonder if you're overdrawing on God's grace, and that's really, really good news. Romans 8:1, there's no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. And then it just mentions he's there, and he's forever making intercession for you. So because of Jesus' obedience, he is the better high priest. God has now given him a name that is higher, superior, better, qualitatively better than any other name. Higher, better than Muhammad, higher than Buddha, higher than Confucius or Krishna or any other religious leader. He's higher than every other name. And Scripture says that every knee will bow, every tongue will one day confess that he is Lord, that he is the better one. So many of this original audience, they're struggling. We read that as we read through these chapters. That's why he's telling them, pay more special attention. Don't harden your heart. Don't fall away. He's mentioning these things because there is something going on with within this community that is challenging them. They are possibly being fiercely opposed. Weary, frustrated, maybe got some doubts, discouraged. And so he wants to address this, just like we get discouraged. I get discouraged. I got to have the, come to Jesus talks with my own self. Talk to myself, remind myself who he is. I get weary. I wonder, is all the effort worth it sometimes? Is all the same things that you're concerned about? And is what I struggle with too, or wrestle with? And what he wants to come alongside and say, you have a high priest who has ascended into the real heavens, not something that's made by hands of man, into the real heavens. He is seated, meaning he's completed. And his work is once and for all. And he's there interceding for you. That ought to make that ought to hit right now. That whatever, I don't know, wherever your life is right now, you have a high priest that is interceding for you. He's in your corner. He's for you. He's not against you. He encourages them. We're not in chapter 12, but we will be there, which is an incredible chapter. But he encourages them to keep going. He says, consider him, this is Hebrews 12, 3-4, consider him, meaning Jesus, who endured from sinners such hostility against himself. Now, why would he zero in on that? Listen to this again. He's telling them, consider him, consider Jesus. Think about what he went through from sinners. How he experienced hostility against himself. I mean, for us, it would just say, can you replay the Passion of Christ in your head for just a moment? Can you think back to the Passion Week? He says, I want you to think of that so that you may not grow weary or become faint-hearted. So think about what Jesus has done for you, so to understand the extent that he's done. So in your struggle, verse 4, against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. He said, now he's not dismissing their struggles, and he wouldn't dismiss your struggle. But I think what he's saying here is as you are hitting resistance and as you are getting criticism or whatever the things are, just know you have not reached the point of resistance that your Savior has reached for you. You have not yet shed your blood, is how he puts it in this section. And sometimes I do, go through challenges and life experiences, and we probably all can get a little pessimistic and down on ourselves and throw a little pity party for ourselves until we read a story or hear about somebody else that's got it far worse than we do. This happened this past week to me. In a coffee cafe, I was just thinking, and I was reading a story about somebody who was just experiencing some really, really tough times, and I thought, man, I need to quit complaining. Because I don't have it half as bad, even close as bad. So what he's doing is he's trying to put into perspective for this group. Yeah, you're struggling. I know you're struggling. But you have not resisted to the point of shedding your own blood. So verse 4, Hebrews 8, 4-10, we'll finish this portion up now. If he were on earth, meaning if Jesus was on earth, he would not be a priest at all. We're like he was on earth. And he wasn't a priest. The priest was Caiaphas. Since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law. And one of the reasons I believe that he wasn't a priest is because he was not from the line of the lineage of Aaron. He was from the line of anybody? Judah. And he says, they serve a copy and a shadow of the heavenly things. That's a little confusing. For when Moses was about to erect the tent, meaning the tabernacle, he was instructed by God saying, see that you make everything... Moses, wake up. See that you make everything. Moses, you're fading. Look, you got to make everything according to the pattern that I'm showing you now on this mountain. But as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is as much more excellent than the old, as the covenant he mediates is better, since it is enacted on better promises. So Jesus is a better high priest. Now he's saying the new covenant is a better new covenant because it's enacted on better promises. For if that first covenant had been faultless, no problem, it got the job done, it was what God really, where we needed to be, then there would be no occasion to look for a second one. There would be no need for a New Testament era. For he finds fault with them when he says, notice this and note this, if you're taking notes in your journal, write Jeremiah 31. I actually think it's 31:31, but I'm not certain, but I know it's Jeremiah 31. The author of Hebrews is now going to quote that unresolved prophecy that we mentioned, where Malachi left off the Old Testament. And now we're like, well, we hear good things are happening, but we don't know when it's going to happen. And so we've got 400 years of trying to figure this thing out. Well, prior to that, 600 BC, Jeremiah says, behold, the days are coming. And everybody says, but when? The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will establish a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. It's not going to be like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. It's going to be better than that. For they did not continue in my covenant, meaning that God kept his promise. He did his part. The people didn't do his part. So I showed no concern for them. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. And here's the promise. Here's the promise that we live in. They weren't living in it at the time. We live in it. The Hebrews were living in it. I will put my law into their mind. I'm not going to put it on brick tablets. I'm going to put it in their mind. And I'm going to write this law on their heart. I will be their God, and they will be my people. So the author is saying in this passage, again, why Jesus is better. One of the reasons is that Jesus didn't walk into a copy like the tabernacle here on this earth, but he actually walked into the ultimate reality, and there he is speaking on your behalf to God. Okay, so a tabernacle was built. Exodus 25 and 40. Write that reference down if you're taking notes in your journal. Exodus 25 and 40. God tells Moses while they're in the wilderness, he says, I want you to build this tabernacle. See to it that you make it after this pattern. Exactly after this pattern. Now this is the part when you get in your reading plan and you start reading the details of a tabernacle and you wonder, what is the significance of this? But let me just throw out how detailed God is to Moses about what he is to build. And the reason why he wants him to do that is it is a copy of what is in heaven. That's why he's so specific. Why wouldn't he just say, hey, just go build something with, here's the dimensions, and just go put something nice together. Make sure your mom's proud of you. Go build something, I don't know, just go do it. No. This is what's so crazy. Listen to these. I'm just going to share a little bit out of Exodus 26. God says, hey, Moses, I want this thing to have 10 curtains of finely twisted linen, blue, purple, scarlet yarn. And by the way, Moses, cherubim woven above them by a skilled worker. Now, don't stop there. I want it to be 28 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. Moses, you got that? You're not taking notes. Write that down because it's very important, because what you are doing is you are reproducing something. Now, it is never going to be as good as what's up here, but you are going to do as good as you can do down here. So do it exactly like I say. Make 50 loops. Not 49, not 51, Moses. 51 loops on one curtain and 50 loops on the end curtain of the other set with the loops opposite each other. And God, I'm a little lost. Could you just say that again? I was like, oh, this is getting detailed. With the loops opposite with each other. You know what this is? This is not an afternoon DIY project. This is your wife dropping some information and you're going, oh my goodness, this is going to take a month. This is going to take forever. This is not go home after work and knock it out in a couple hours. Make 50 gold clasps. Fasten them together. Curtains of goat's hair. Put that for the tent over the tabernacle. 11 of those. Make for the tent a covering of ram's skin dyed red. And over that, put a covering of other durable leather. This is funny to me because I know, man, when I'm in this reading plan, I'm thinking, I'm trying to stay in this thing. I'm trying. But verse 30 then says, set up the tabernacle according to the plan shown on you on the mountain. And going back to our Hebrews 8, he's saying that the earthly high priest, they entered an imperfect setting, the tabernacle, which was an imperfect setting. Think of this, it's a copy of the original. You've got a print of the original, you got original, and this is a copy. It's the best that it can get, but it will never, it's never going to look like it did on Pinterest, right? You're never going to get there. You tried really hard, it's never going to reach the standard because at best, this is what we have. And he's saying, here's some of the reasons why Jesus is a better high priest. He didn't walk into a copy, he didn't walk into a print, he walked into the original. And not only is he walking into the original, he's sitting down next to God, and that means completion, and he doesn't have to make a sacrifice in 30 minutes or the next day or the next day. And so this is the argument that he's making to a group of people who are like, what do I do? He's saying Jesus is better. And I'm not just saying better because my team is better than your team, like the Cowboys are better than the Chiefs. We all know that's not true. But, whatever team, Astros, and we're not saying that. What we're saying is qualitatively, for your life, for eternity, for reality, this is the way things go. And Jesus is better. And I'm rolling out the reasons to you. You understand what it's connected to. Now we're not so familiar with the Old Testament. We got to work at it. They are anchored in the Old Testament. He's eternal. That means Jesus isn't going to die like all the other guys. He's better than the temple because he's operating in the real thing. That's a better temple. He's a better sacrifice because it's once and for all. So Dick Lucas, he puts it like this, that if you had like first century neighbors, you got a Roman neighbor and a Christian neighbor. Or as they would call them, an atheist neighbor, Christian neighbor. And they're having a conversation. The Romans notice that something's been different with this family. And he says, oh, I see that you have a new religion. Where's your temple now? And the Christian would go, well, we don't actually have a temple. Oh, well, where do your priests operate now? Well, we don't have any priests. Well, then who does all the sacrifices so that God will now accept you and keep accepting you? It's like, well, Jesus is our sacrifice. They say, well, what kind of religion is this? And the Christian would say, oh, it's not a religion. It's not a group of rules. It's a relationship. It's a relationship. That God condescended to us, that came to us to be the sacrifice once and for all so that we could be right and be a friend of who God is. Where religion will say, you do all of these rules and you'll be accepted, the relationship says, you're accepted. Now obey. Joyfully, gratefully, obey. It's not a religion, it's a relationship. So let me just land this plane. So the Old Testament, it provides this external framework that as you read the Old Testament and even the New Testament, you notice that it doesn't have much power to change someone. That at best, it's behavioral modification. It's like we know how to do the right things, but it's not always for the right reason. So Jeremiah comes along and he begins to prophesy. He said, God's told me something. I got some news to you. There's going to be a new covenant, and this new covenant, the law is going to be written on your heart. It's good news. Meaning it's not just, you don't just have to always rely on behavioral modification, that God has the ability to transform the heart. And it's like this, the law could only show us how much of a smuck we were, because we never could reach it. And here's God's choices. God said, okay, you can never come up to me. You can never come up to me. So I think what I'll do, I think I'll come down to you. Instead of 10 commandments, 5 commandments. Just hit 5, right? Just do 5. There's these festivals, just do 3 of the festivals. What I'm going to do is dumb things out. It'd be like a school teacher who gives a test and everybody flunks, everybody's doing terrible and the scores are not good, and whatever TA or whoever it is going to come in and evaluate. And so she says, okay, from now on, C's or A's. I mean, like that. And I was like, sweet. C's or A's. If you make a C, I'm giving you an A. And if you make an F, I'm giving you a C. It's like, sweet. Basically what she's saying, you guys can't come up to our level, to standard, so I'm just going to come down to you. And that's not what Jesus did. What God did through Jesus, he said, I'm going to come down to you. And I'm going to pay. The standard is still there. But I've got someone that's going to meet that standard for you. And where it talks about at the very end, you guys look at that later on, at the very end of 8, it says he's going to write it on our heart. Let me just tell you quickly why that's significant for me. Because I know what's in my heart. I know myself just like you know yourself. And I can, I try to pursue God as closely as